Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Bruchim Abayim to Kilat Alei Tzion. And it's, to be honest, with somewhat mixed feelings, of course, that I welcome everybody here this evening. We're very honoured to be joined by distinguished Rabbanim, particularly Rabbi Lord Sachs, Rabbi Alei Tabory, and other distinguished colleagues, also by members of Kilat Alei Tzion and neighbouring communities, and many people who have fond and admirable memories of Moreinu Harav Binyamin Yehuda ben Harav Tzvi, alav hashalom. That's one of our earliest rabbinic leaders in this community. I'm in a little of a strange position speaking this evening, in the sense that I never knew Rav Tabory as the Rav of Kilat Alei Tzion, for obvious reasons, but I did of course know Rav Tabory from the Gush days, and in that sense I've known Rav Tabory for well over 30 years. Of course his passing at the beginning of Elul took us all a little bit by surprise, even though that we'd known that Rav Tabory was very ill and suffering Yisurin Shel Ahava for many years. And we extend our condolences to Rav Aviad, Moreinu Harav, Ben Moreinu Harav, and we hope that you'll take those condolences back with you, back to Alon Shvut, to your mother and to the rest of your family, to your sister and the grandchildren, and really Kilat Alei Tzion does join with you in your sorrow at this time. Rav Lichtenstein Zichron Olive Racha was always keen to point out in Parshat Noach that Noach was given two instructions. That's before the Mabul, Noach was told, he was told to come into the Teva, take all his family and escape from the corruption and from what was going on around and go into a safe environment. But he didn't stop there, because at the end of the Mabul, Noach was also told, Seimen HaTeva, leave the Teva, go out of the ark and rebuild the world. And Rav Lichtenstein was often keen to point out that we have dual responsibilities. We have a responsibility to closet ourselves in the world of Torah, to put ourselves into a secure environment, almost hermetically sealed, immersing ourselves in the world of Torah. But then at a certain stage, we also have to go out and promote that Torah and share that Torah with others. And I think that's a very apt way of describing Rav Tabory, Zichron Oliv Racha, that he was a person who was essentially a man of the yeshiva in so many ways. That was his home, and yet repeatedly he went beyond the confines of the Kotlei Beit HaMedrash, went on a number of missions of shlichut around the world, and the final one that he undertook really just before he became ill was his shlichut here to London and his role as Rav of Kilat Alei Tzion, as well as being a Marbitz Torah here in London. And I want to share with you just three thoughts before we pass on to our main Maspidim this evening. But I want to share with you just three thoughts about the uniqueness of Rav Tabory and what stands out about him in my mind. The first is that he was always immensely clear when he taught Torah. It shouldn't really be such a chiddush, but sometimes it is. I was never actually in Rav Tabory's Shir Yomi at Gush, but I heard many shiurim from him at Shabbat afternoons and Motzei Shabbatot, when the various Ramim would give shiurim. And whether you were in Shiur Aleph or whether you were in the Kollel, you always came out knowing more than you went in knowing, and knowing what you'd learnt. That wasn't always the case. Sometimes you'll listen to a shir and it must be very good, and you're convinced it was brilliant, but you're not quite sure exactly what you got out of it. And that was never the case with Rav Tabory. Whatever level you were on, whether in the yeshiva or I'm sure in the communities as well, that's when he gave a shir, it was clear, it was well structured, and you knew at the end what you'd come out with and what new material you'd learnt. So that's the first thing that I want to share with you about Rav Tabory. The second is that the impact that he had on Northwest London Jewry in the short time that he was here. Because really he was quite a unique phenomena here in London. Baruch Hashem, London is blessed with many Talmidei Chachamim, but it was a novelty to have Talmid Chacham with his background in the Gush, that's at Yeshiva University, as a Talmid of Rav Soloveitchik, as a Ram in a Hesder Yeshiva, and all such things. And people had not previously been experienced to something like this. There was sort of a common perception that Hesder Yeshivot, they spend their time learning Rav Kook, and that's sort of the extent of the Talmud Torah that they can produce. What Rav Tabory demonstrated to the wider Kehillah was really that there was great depth of Torah, great breadth of Torah, great skill in teaching Torah, and that the modern Orthodox world, the YU world, the Yeshivat Hesder world, was able to produce outstanding Talmidei Chachamim. And I know that many people came to hear Rav Tabory Shiurim, even though that they wouldn't previously have thought of associating with themselves with Torah from those backgrounds. Nevertheless, it was just clear to them when he spoke and when he gave a shir and when he gave a Dvar Torah that he was a man of great erudition and a very, very distinguished Talmid Chacham. And what he brought to London in a way that hadn't previously been experienced by our Kehilot was an exposure to the Torah and the teachings, the Lomdus in particular, of Rav Soloveitchik, and the halachic positions of Rav Soloveitchik, and that Masorah as well, and that was really, I think, vital and important contribution that Rav Tabory made to the Torah scene here in London. And then the third observation about him, of course, is the credibility that he gave to Kehillat Alei Tzion. When he came, Kehillat Alei Tzion was a fledgling community. It was a brave and daring move of the community to bring over Rosh Yeshiva from Eretz Yisrael to lead the community for a year. Made a very powerful statement about what this community wanted to be. And if they'd chosen the wrong person, then it could have really caused our community to lose all credibility. What they did was they brought over somebody of outstanding midot, outstanding personality, outstanding Torah, and I'm still often told by people that Rav Tabory's day, that's shiurim, that people would be flocking to hear his shiurim, packing out the room. We heard recently about on Shavuot night how Rav Tabory would just sit there and learn Rambam, and everybody would just want to sit there and listen to him, learning and teaching the Rambam. I have to say that when I was first appointed as the Rav of Kehillat Alei Tzion, I was a little bit nervous about stepping into his shoes. Rav Tabory was an outstanding first-rate Talmid Chacham. That's what the community had been used to, and it certainly, following in his footsteps, made me very nervous about this position. So as I say, we're very, very honoured and privileged that Rav Alei Tabory is here from Israel, that Rabbi Sachs is going to address us as well this evening. We're also privileged that Bogrim of the Gush are with us this evening, as well as Talmidim of Rav Aviad's from Eretz HaTzvi, and wider members of the community as well. And before we pass on to our guest speakers this evening, I'd like to call on the chairman of our Kehillah, Elliot Kay, to also share some Divrei Hesped about Rav Tabory, Zichrono Livracha.
B'shut Harav, B'shut Rabbi Sachs, Rav Aviad, Rabbi Ginsbury, friends. I first encountered Rav Binyamin Tabory through his Torah. During the 2 years that our dear friend Rav Aviad led this community in London as our founding Rav, he would very often quote his father. Those 2 years were ones of tremendous growth and excitement in Alei Tzion. But following Rav Aviad's return to Israel, the next year was a difficult one for our Kehillah. With no Rav and questions around long-term viability, Alei Tzion really faced an existential threat. And then, in the spring of 2007, Rav Aviad suggested that his father might be persuaded to come to London for a short period as the Rav of Alei Tzion. We knew that Rav Tabory had been a senior Ram in Gush for many years, And we also knew that he'd been on several other shlichuyot, including as Rosh Kollel of Torah Mitzion. We were very keen to meet him, so we agreed that he would come as a scholar in residence for Shavuot with a view to potentially staying in the longer term the following year. When he came, before Yom Tov started, a few of us, as many of us are in the room now, met with Rav Tabory. And I have an unbelievably clear recollection of that meeting. He sat there and he said, I'm just a Maggid Shir. That's all I do. I just teach. I'm not a community rabbi. I can't work. I remember this phrase, I can't work a room. I don't do the touchy-feely stuff. That was another thing that he said. So we were a bit nervous. But by the end of, I think it was a 3-day Yom Tov that year, we were falling over ourselves to welcome him. Firstly, and obviously, the quality of Rav Tabory's shiurim was outstanding. Not just in terms of content, but his teaching style was completely captivating. But also, he knew how to work a room. Going around the Kiddush, over meals, effortlessly, engagingly, we absolutely knew we had to have Rav Tabory to come to Alei Tzion. And so began an intensive period of fundraising and preparations. We needed to find a significant amount of money for a community of our size. And we did, as a result of the generosity of many of our members, a very generous donation from the Tapnak Family Trust, and it's lovely to see Corin and David with us here this evening, and a critical contribution from the United Synagogue too. We also entered into partnerships with LSJS and with Emmanuel College for Rav Tabory to teach there. And we needed to find a house. So we took a lease on 85 Hillview Gardens, Harnoff, as the Taborys sweetly refer to it. A house that my wife Susie, amongst others, helped kit out in readiness for their arrival, which was the really beginning of a strong friendship between our families. And so shortly before Rosh Hashanah Tafshin Samachet, Rav Tabory and Naomi arrived in London. And as Rabbi Roselar just mentioned, I don't think it's hyperbolic at all to describe Rav Tabory's effect on Alei Tzion and indeed on the wider Northwest London Torah community as transformational. For Alei Tzion, Rav Tabory's presence totally regalvanized our community, which grew exponentially under his leadership. His shiurim attracted hundreds of new faces into Alei Tzion, eager to hear his Torah. He really put us on the map. And for the wider community, again, as Rabbi Roselar just mentioned, it really was the first exposure to many to a modern Orthodox world-class Talmid Chacham. I will never forget one Shabbos afternoon when Rav Tabory was giving his Shabbat afternoon shir, 2 Hasidim came in. And at the end, one said to the other, "You know what? He said, he's a Londischer Mensch." Even with a Sikhi Pasmuga. Rav Tabory launched the Alei Tzion Gemara Shir, still going strong 12 years later, now under the leadership of MD Spitzer, who wrote a beautiful tribute in our latest Alei Tzion magazine, Degel. Thank you, MD. If you haven't read it, there are several copies around. Rav Tabory's Shabbat afternoon Shir regularly attracted 50, 60 attendees, and he held the entire room captivated. His pre-Shacharit Minchas Chinuch Shir in his own house on a Shabbos morning brought many people early for coffee and cake. And his Sunday morning shiurim on Shutim of various Achronim again brought in people from all over London. But it wasn't just his shiurim. His love of Torah was completely infectious. It made everyone around him want to learn more, which is a truly extraordinary gift for an educator. And as I said, it wasn't just a Maggid Shir. Rav Binyamin and Naomi threw themselves wholeheartedly into the ongoing project to grow and develop our community. They hosted events in their home, participated in all our social activities, pushing us to do more, and were a magnet attracting people into our community. And he wasn't just a huge Talmid Chacham either. He had a gloriously warm smile, which matched his incredibly warm personality. He and Naomi connected with so many people in our community on so many different levels, because he was very approachable. He was so wise, worldly wise. You could have an equally comfortable discussion about the latest World Series in baseball as you could learning a kasha of the Ketzos with Rav Tabory. There are so many anecdotes about his extraordinary knowledge. One sticks in my mind was one of those Sunday mornings that I just mentioned. We were due to learn a tshuva of the Ketav Sofer. I can't remember what it was about, but we got into the room with our coffee and croissant ready. And Rav Tabory gave a short opening about the context of the tshuva that we were about to discuss, and he picked up the handout that had been prepared. We all had a copy in front of us, and he looked at it and he realised that they'd photocopied the wrong tshuva. So he paused for about 20 seconds, and then gave an entire share on the tshuva that was in front of us, quoting Gemara's Rishonim and Achronim completely ba'al peh. You hear stories, or you read stories sometimes, about Gedolim of old that could do that, but we had the zchut of having Rav Tabory in our community. And what is most extraordinary to me is that he and Naomi were in fact only in London for 10 months, less than a year. And yet their impact was so immense that it reverberates right here and now. We're sitting in this Beit Midrash where Rav Tabory's Torah continues to be learned just as he would want. The Shabbat after Rav Tabory's Patira, I was davening on Friday night with my dear friend and former co-trustee of Alei Tzion Rav Tabory. It was also lovely to have you back here this evening. And we were commenting to each other how hardly a moment goes by without recalling something that Rav Tabory taught us. There we were davening Friday night, and we're just about to get to Lechadodi, and remember the shir that he gave about why Lechadodi is basically about Yerushalayim, not about Shabbat at all. And then, just before the Amida, Vashamru, and how he gave, again, a whole halacha shir about why that is or is not a hefsek in tefillah. His Torah was incredible, and as I said, he was here for such a short period of time. Rav Tabory recognised that learning Torah is not just an intellectual pursuit, however cute a chakiri he could come up with. Torah is also immensely spiritual. I vividly recall his shir on the sugya that discusses that the Bet Mikdash was destroyed because people didn't say Birkat HaTorah. Rav Tabory loved singing, and singing with Rav Tabory was an equally uplifting and powerful experience. In his last few years, as his body was destroyed by this horrible and cruel disease, many people would come and learn next to his bed. When we came, I used to come and sing. And I always enjoyed his reaction, however slight, to the Nagunim that we sang. Susie and I and our children would always look forward to visiting the Taborys at their home in Elon Shvut. And we would often visit on Sukkot. On Sukkot, one of the Hoshanot we say starts with the words, Om Ani Choma, my people are a wall. It's a particular favourite of Rav Tabory's. He taught me a tune to it when he could still sing, a very haunting melody that I'd never heard before. And the words of that Hoshana are incredibly powerful. And reflecting over the last few days, reading them again, to me they speak a lot about Rav Tabory. The Beis Din Shamala asks Israel, are you steadfast in your faith as a wall? Or are you influenced by every alien culture like a door swinging on its hinges, this way and that? Israel responds, Om Ani Choma, I am a wall, strong and stalwart in my love for the Ribbon Shalom. Despite his unbearable affliction, Rav Tabory remained saturated in his Ahavat Hashem throughout his life. The next words, Barak Chama, brilliant as the sun. Rav Tabory's Torah has lit and will continue to light up the lives of thousands of Talmidim, not just here in Alei Tzion, but throughout the entire world. Chavuka udevuka bach, she hugs and cleaves to you. For me, those words totally sum up Rav Tabory's love of Torah and his connection with Hashem. Everyone at Alei Tzion, whether or not they were part of the community 12 years ago, owes a huge debt of gratitude to Rav Tabory. Many of us who are inspired by him continue to learn his Torah. And in fact, his sefer will be available outside afterwards for anyone that would like to acquire it. There are thousands of opportunities to listen to his shirim online. So really, as MD mentioned at the end of his beautiful tribute in Degel, we can still learn from Rav Tabory today. All of us at Alei Tzion wish Naomi, Rav Aviad, Adina and their families long life and hope that you can take comfort from the incredible inspiration that Rav Tabory was and continues to be to all of us here in London. Yehi Zichro Baruch. Now it gives me great pleasure to ask Rabbi Sachs.
Birshut, Kvod Maradatra, Rabbi Roselaw, Shachem Tov, Rabbi Ginsbury. Elliot, thank you for those moving and beautiful words. And of course, very especially Rav Aviad, who founded this minyan, who brought your father Zichro, Zechet Tzadik Livracha, to be in our midst. and whom Hashem has given a double portion of the beauty of spirit that he had and that he radiated and that shines through you. It's a privilege to have you in our midst and to say how much we feel for you, and we ask Hashem to comfort you and all the family. Friends, in thinking about Rav Tabory's Zatzal, the first thing that comes to mind is this powerful statement that we make every single day in the very first Kaddish we say. The first Kaddish we say is Kaddish de Rabbanan. The first thing we ask Hashem for is teachers to inspire us. And what is so powerful about that prayer is that we pray that Hashem should give them china v'chista v'rachamim. Before any intellectual attributes come the moral attributes of compassion and kindness and understanding and sensitivity. The Torah for which we pray is a Torah Chesed. And that is the most powerful impact your father Zatzal made on me, and I think all who knew him. That this was a man of midot, a man of extraordinarily powerful ability to connect with people, to draw them close, lift them up, and inspire them. And that he was an answer to our prayer. And of course, Chazal say, and it's Rashi's reading of Vayetzev, the presence of a tzaddik in a town, in a city, makes a difference. And as long as he was here, we felt the difference. There was something different in the air. We have an Adam Gadol b'tochenu. We have a great man in our midst. And therefore, his absence, Yetziat Tzadik min ha'ayah u'min ha'olam, was Hashem. We all feel bereaved. Rav Aviad, I thought the only thing I could say to do justice to what your late father inspired in me is to repeat a Torah that came to mind as soon as I was asked to speak on this occasion, and I wondered why that piece of Torah that I never said before and I've never said since. And I went and looked at my notes, and I discovered that I wrote that while he was here, inspired by his presence. So if I may, I would just like to share with you the Torah that he inspired in me. And it begins with an extraordinary statement of Chazal. We know that the world has not dealt, the non-Jewish world has not dealt kindly with rabbinic Judaism. Somehow or other, people have compared it with the great inspiration of the prophets, and they said here the rabbis came and took ethics and turned it into law, turned soaring visions and turned them into prosaic detail, took high ideals and focused on minutiae. And Chazal knew that this was wrong. And they said something extraordinary. It's a Gemara in Baba Basra, which says, Chacham adif minavi. Not only when prophecy ceased did Judaism keep its sages, but, said the rabbis, the sages were in their way even greater than the prophets. And I never saw a real explanation of it. The Gemara gives a proof text, but it's a strange proof text. V'navi levav chochma. Misreading v'navi, which means let us get, and read it as prophet. A prophet needs the heart of a sage, therefore his sage is greater than the prophet. Clearly Chazal meant more than just basing it on that pasuk and misreading that pasuk, or at least reading it aggadically. What did they mean? And I want to give you 3 examples where Chazal solved a problem that even the Nevi'im were not able to solve. Here it is. The first problem, peace. There have never been more beautiful utterances on peace than those given by the prophets. They are the world's oldest statements of peace. They're even written near the United Nations building in New York. They will beat their, they will beat their swords into plowshares, their spears into pruning hooks. Nation will not take up sword against nation, nor will they train for war anymore. Good. It's good to know the United Nations knows what it hasn't yet achieved. I remember once speaking in the United Nations with Rav Lau. And Rav Lau quoted the pasuk from 9 chapters later on about the lamb dwelling with the wolf. He said, it never happened yet, except once. He said, when did the lamb dwell with the wolf? On Noah's Ark. Why did the lamb dwell with the wolf in Noah's Ark? Because they knew if they didn't live together, they'd drown. So that was his message to the United Nations. Either we learn to live together or we will all drown. It's a beautiful thing. Now, the wonderful thing about the prophets is that their vision, Michael Friedman, the historian of law at King's College London, wrote a book called The Invention of Peace, and he says war is as old as humankind, peace is a modern invention, and he dates it to the 1790s or 1780s, and Immanuel Kant's essay on perpetual peace. Well, Isaiah's prophecy was 8th century BCE, a little bit before Immanuel Kant. So the prophets were the first people to speak of peace as an ideal. It's an extraordinary thing. But along come Chazal and say, the famous Mishnah in Gittin, that Mishum Darchei Shalom, for the sake of peace, what do? Mefarnasin Aniyei Akum im Aniyei Yisrael. We give support to the poor of the non-Jewish population as well as the Jewish population, Mishum Darchei Shalom. Mevakrim Chole Akum im Chole Yisrael. When you're doing hospital visiting, you visit non-Jews as well as Jews. When somebody can't afford a burial, we bury the poor of the heathens as well as the poor of Israel. Mishum Darchei Shalom. All of these institutions the sages instituted for the sake of peace. What is the difference between Isaiah's vision of peace and the sages' vision of peace? Isaiah's vision of peace is soaring, it's magnificent, but it is entirely utopian. It didn't happen yet, and it may not happen for a while yet. I'm not sure what the results of the next election will be, who knows? But I'm not expecting peace suddenly to break out. But the sages came along and instituted, well ahead of the concept of a multicultural society, an actual program for good community relations in which you made sure that non-Jews as well as Jews benefited from all the social services and the sense of community spirit that Jews had. This is an astoundingly innovative program. But what does it do? It takes a high ideal and makes it real on the ground. It's a completely different sensibility to the prophets. But it turns a vision into a reality. It turns an aspiration into an actual social circumstance. That is how the sages dealt with the issue of peace. Do you know what else they instituted? Mishum Darchei Shalom? Who's a gubber here? What do we say in Gabon? You call a Kohen Rishon and a Levi Sheni and Yisrael Shlishi Mishum Darchei Shalom. What is the issue there? Let me tell you historically what is the issue there. The tension between the priesthood in Jerusalem and the rest of the Jewish people was immense. We have the entire Sadducee-Pharisee split is essentially the Tzedokim, well, the Bnei Tzadok, the people are around the Sadducees. Tzadok was the great priestly family. One of the biggest splits of the lot in Jewish history around that period, the first century BCE and the first century CE, was between the Tzedokim and the Prushim. The second one was between the priesthood in Jerusalem and the Dead Sea Scrolls or originators, the Qumran sect, who clearly were escaping from Jerusalem because of what they saw as the corruption of the priesthood. It would have been so easy for the sages to say, there's no temple, there's no sacrifices, we don't need priests anymore. What did they do instead? They said, no, we still have such a thing as Kuhuna, and we still honor a Kohen by calling him first to Kriyat Torah. Now, if that is not a piece of practical rabbinics, I don't know what is. That's a beautiful piece of conflict resolution. Let us honor the Kohanim, realizing what they have lost. They lost their whole world, their whole function. Let us not feel they have lost their honor. And for the sages to say that, the sages who saw themselves as heirs of the Purushim, not of the Tzedakim, was an extraordinary thing to do. So that's number one. They took peace and turned it from an aspiration to a reality. Secondly, rebuke. What is the command of telling somebody off? I say this in the light of various protesters, climate changes, and so on and so forth. Listen carefully to what the prophet Ezekiel reports in chapter 2. God tells the prophet Ezekiel, "Son of man, I am sending you to the Israelites, a rebellious nation. They've rebelled against me. They and their fathers have revolted against me to this very day. The people I am sending you to," says Hashem to you, Yechezkel, "are obstinate and stubborn. Say to them, this is what Hashem says, Uben im yishma'u im yechtelu," whether they listen or they refuse to listen, v'yadu shenavi haya b'kirbam. Let them know that there was a prophet in their midst. You know, this is what Hashem said to Yechezkel. It's serious. I don't call this virtue signaling. But it can come close. You say your thing, and it doesn't matter whether they listen or you don't listen. You, at any rate, have saved your own soul. That is what Hashem says to Yechezkel. When Chazal came along and looked at that same mitzvah, which they applied to everyone, not just Nevi'im, what did they say in Bava Metzia? Afilu mea pa'amim. You have to rebuke even 100 times. It's not enough to say it once, and whether they listen or they don't listen, they know they had a prophet in their midst. The Gemara where is it? In Arachin says ad nazifa or ad haka'ah, until they actually insult you or until they hit you. So on the one hand, you've got to keep going. You've got to keep wrestling with people until they listen. And at the same time, says the Gemara in Yevamos, kishem shemitzvah loma davar nishma, kach mitzvah shalom loma davar shalom nishma. Just as it's a mitzvah to say something that will be listened to, so it is a mitzvah not to say something that won't be listened to. It is the same concept of rebuke, but illuminated completely differently from a prophetic point of view and from a rabbinic point of view. The prophetic point of view is you make a statement. Let it be on record. You were warned. But the rabbinic view is, will I be effective or not? If not, don't even do it. Mutiv shigu shogigim v'ayehu mezidim. If they won't listen, you may make things worse. Because they were unintentional, now they'll know they're sinning. So if you're going to make it worse, don't say anything. But if they might just listen, then afilu mea pa'amim. Then you have to listen even 100 times. And that, I think, is again taking something that's a very profound moral ideal in the prophets and saying, no, let's bring it down to earth and make a difference to people's lives. And finally, the biggest issue for me in the whole of Tanakh is this completely split view that we have. It exists all the way through Tanakh of what constitutes Avodat Hashem. For the Kohen, it's absolutely clear. Avodat Hashem is offering a sacrifice according to extremely precisely configured rules, and those rules never change. So Tomid Shel Boker, Tomid Shel Ben Arbaim, those things never change. the whole institution of Musafim, all the rest of it. The Nevi'im serve Hashem by prayer. They speak to him directly. And the words constantly change depending on the circumstance. The Nevi'im, by and large, do not offer sacrifices unless they're making a point, like Eliyahu Hanavi on Har Carmel. They don't serve Hashem that way. And this led to a profound difference of understanding among Chazal, as Gemara in Brachos Daf Chava, and it is repeated in the Middle Ages between the Rambam and Ramban as to what tefillah actually represents. Is it part of Torah Kohanim? Is it a substitute for sacrifices? Or is it like in the tradition of the Avod, Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Tfilat Chana, all the rest of it? The Rambam holds it's in the prophetic tradition. The Ramban holds that tefillah is a substitute for sacrifice, and the Gemara brings both views in Brachos Daf Chava. There's something that I wrote in my introduction to the Siddur, commentary to the Siddur, which I think is extraordinary. Chazal solved the whole problem in the world's most simple way. They established that for every tefillah except Ma'ariv, we should say a prayer twice, once individually and silently, and a second time collectively out loud by the Shliach Tzibur. When we say a prayer silently and individually, we are acting, says the Gemara, in the tradition of Chana, in the prayer that she utters in the Haftarah we say on the first day of Rosh Hashanah. We are saying a prophetic prayer, and that is why any tefillah b'lachash can contain individual requests, which we can innovate within the context of that particular bracha. And the tefillah of tzibur is a substitute for sacrifice, and since there was no korban in the evening, we have no repetition of the Amidah in Ma'ariv. The sages simply said, we're going to pray twice. Once as Nevi'im and once as Kohanim. And in that single act, they united a conceptual and experiential split that had existed throughout the biblical age. And it is quite remarkable, the genius with which they did so. I think I've given you 3 examples of how the sages solved problems that remain problems throughout the prophetic age for the prophets. They had the greatest of ideals, but the sages brought those ideals and made them real in the lives of Jewry for the last 2,000 years. Rav Tabory was just such a man. He was able to bring different traditions together. He was able to bring high ideals and make them real in people's lives. And that is why, while he was here, I suddenly understood the meaning of that phrase, Adif Chacham min Avi. A sage can be greater than a prophet. We had a great man in our midst. We learned so much from him. And we are simply committed, each one of us who had the privilege of knowing him, to remain inspired by his memory, to greater heights and depths in our learning, and hopefully in our lives. We say to you, Aviad, may you continue, and all the members of the family, to live all the great midot that he gave you. And the Yizich Baruch, may his memory endure as a blessing. Amen.
ערב טוב, ברשות הרבנים, ברשות הרב סאקס, אלין, בקינסברי, רוזלר, קהילת Alei Tzion and friends. I look around this room and a lot of memories come back to me in the beginning of Alei Tzion. Quite emotional, being here at this time. When I gave the hesped for my Abba, that morning when I had to write the hesped, I had so many thoughts in my mind, and I called my sister and my mother and I asked them if they would like me to say anything on their behalf. And they both said separately, make sure that you do one thing, make sure that you mention in your hesped, you say thank you to people that deserve thanks. Hakarat tov, recognizing the good and thanking people was a very important part in Abba's life. So please make sure you do that. That's how I began my father's hesped, and just to mention that my second, the second point of my hesped was about how my Abba was so connected to Talmidei Chachamim all over the world. And in the week of the Shiva, as I was going through my father's books, finding some amazing letters, another time for that, I found my father's hesped for his father. And in it started Hakarat Tov, and the second item was my grandfather's Kesher to Talmidei Chachamim. So here, also this evening, I would like to begin with Hakarat Tov, of saying thank you to all that are here tonight, all the people that the past few weeks have written to us, called us, visited us. We have been very blessed. We have been blessed with so many friends that have surrounded us and given us nechama and support in these very difficult weeks. When I had to decide at the hesped what to do at the hesped, what to speak about, I reflected on what my Abba liked to do. My Abba was an amazing storyteller. Every time he gave a shir, it always connected to a story. And even when my Abba was sick for many years, there were 2 times in his years of sickness where he couldn't talk, where he somehow did communicate to us. And in both cases, it was all about communicating us a story. The first time was when my son Yair was bar mitzvah, and my father couldn't speak anymore. But that was one of the only moments and times of his sickness that we were able somehow to connect something to his throat to allow him to speak. And here we were at the bar mitzvah, sitting around the wheelchair, and there was quiet and silence in the bar mitzvah. And everyone was waiting to hear what my father was about to say because he hadn't spoken for a year or two. And here he is, struggling with every word, and we were all waiting. What is he going to tell us? And of course, it was a funny story about Yair going to Gan here in Ner Yisrael. When he was here in London, my father came to visit and that's what he wanted to tell us, a funny story about Yair. And then, around the same time, Rav Lichtenstein was nifter, and again my father used it for the second time. He used this machshir to somehow speak, and again, what did he tell us? He told us stories about Rav Lichtenstein. When my father was asked to write a hesped for Rav Lichtenstein, he couldn't speak anymore, but what he did was he moved his lips, and he used to blink with his eyes, and we used to go through the Aleph base with him, Aleph, Bed, Gimel, stop, or A, B, C, stop, and we used to write down what he told us. And when I read his hesped at the Shloshim of Rav Lichtenstein, I was the only hesped that my father gave, which was only stories about Rav Lichtenstein. Everyone was speaking about Rav Lichtenstein's personality, and I just gave over stories of Rav Lichtenstein that my father knew. So I'm going to also share a few stories with all of you tonight about my father, and just to remind us of the special personality of my father. First of all, it may be obvious to you, it's obvious to me that my father really was a real Talmid Chacham. When I was a kid growing up, I thought that all Rabbanim are such great Talmid Chachamim like my Abba. And it took me years to understand that he really was very special. I tell people that when I was a kid, learning with my Abba, I once came to my Abba and I said to him, Abba, I never learned Baba Batra. I missed Baba Batra. I was in the army for Baba Batra. I never learned Baba Batra. I was very embarrassed. Abba, we have to learn Baba Batra. So Abba said, fine. So we sat down and learned Baba Batra, and there was only one Gemara on the table. I had the Gemara, and my father didn't have the Gemara in front of him, and he was reading the Gemara. He was reading Chizkat HaBatim. he was mamash reading the Gemara, and I was sitting with the Gemara, and he was reading the Gemara. And I was following in the Gemara with him, and then he stops and he starts, wait a second, he says, there's a very important Tosfot here. And he goes, third line from the top, fourth letter, fourth word, read. And that's how I grew up. That was normal for me, that you learn about Batra with one Gemara between two people, and only one is actually reading without a Gemara. I tell this story quite often because it really was a story that shook me up very much for many years. When my father was sick, the first time he was very sick in hospital, this was 20 years ago, when right after Deborah and I got married, and we went to visit him in the hospital, and he was really not doing so well. He was in ICU, and an older woman came over to us on Shabbat and asked Deborah and myself if we would say Tehillim because her husband's dying. We sat there the whole Shabbat, and this gentleman passed away on Shabbat. The lady turns to me and says to me, please make sure, right as Shabbat comes out, if you can come, please say Havdalah for me. And I thought to myself, trick question. Onein, Shabbos, Havdalah, I remember something, wasn't so sure, no Sfarim, no one to ask. The only person I can only ask in this world is my father. Although I used to do this all the time. I always ask my father everything. And I used to want to show off to my students how my father knows everything. And he didn't even know. I used to sometimes, in the middle of shir, when I had a kasha in the Tosfot or something, I used to phone my father in shir and put it on loudspeaker without telling him that he's on loudspeaker. And I say, Abba, we're in Bab Basra, Daf, Fil, Lam, Gimel, Tosfot, this. Can you explain? And my father would just on the phone just throw out some Rishonim and Achronim and explain the sugya on the spot. I just wanted to impress the guys. I wanted them to show that they should see how a person can know Torah that way. Anyway, I go to my father. He's in ICU. I say, Abba, what should I do? I don't know what to ask. I start crying. Abba, I have a shaila here. Should I say Havdalah? Should I not say Havdalah? And my father suddenly opens his eyes, looks at me, and says, Aviad. B'chok Rabbeinu Simcha and Marim Rotenberg in the Rosh Simon Gimel Brachas Perek Bet, and shut his eyes. And when I reminded him of that, he never remembered it afterwards. I mentioned at the Levaya of my father's memory of Torah, how he knew Torah. I told a story how as a young boy he learned at the age of 17 by Rabbi Aaron Soloveitchik in YU. And I mentioned how my father told me at the end of the year, Rabbi Aaron Soloveitchik turned to the shir and said he wasn't very happy the way they were learning that year. And he decided at the end of the year they're getting a bechina on the entire masechet that they were learning that year. My father went over to Rabbi Aaron and said, Rabbi Aaron, I have so much university work. I don't think I can do a bechina on everything. But you should know that whatever you taught me, your chidushim that you taught me this year, I will remember for the rest of my life. I don't need to do bechina on it. Rabbi Aaron said, okay, you're putter. You don't have to do the bechina. My father told me that 30, 40 years later, he bumped into Rabbi Aaron Soloveitchik in Yerushalayim, who turned to him in the street and said, Binyamin, remember what you told me? So tell me, Sugya and Gittin Daf, whatever, what did I say on that Gemara? And my father on the spot said the entire Mahalach that he heard 30 years before. And I can prove it that because one year in Yeshivat Eretz Tzvi, we asked my father to go give a shir. We're learning Shomrim, but Mitzia. And we asked my father to give a shir. My father came, gave a shir, no one understood it, but he gave a shir. And at the end of the shir, he said, I heard this shir from Rabbi Aaron Soloveitchik in 1961. My father never wrote it down. My father didn't take notes like that. It wasn't written down. And he said, and that was Rabbi Aaron Soloveitchik's bar mitzvah drasha that he delivered to us in 1961. And I turned to my students and said to them, how many of you in 40 years from now are going to repeat that, what you just heard, without writing it down? That responsibility that my father had to know Torah and to remember the Torah and to pass it on to the next generation was part of his responsibility, but also part of his deep love that he had to Torah. Which brings me really to the idea of Ahavat Torah. The Rambam says that the mitzvah of loving Kadosh Baruch Hu is making him loved by others. My father loved Torah, but he really made others love Torah as well. His love to Torah was so simple. I tell people that when I was a kid, once cleaning up, at some point my parents asked me to clean their bedroom, and I moved their beds, and I found a chuvas of the Rashba under the bed on the floor. You know, you move a bed, you find a newspaper. Under my father's bed, there was a chuvas of Rashba lying there, because he was in bed reading chuvas of Rashba, and it fell out of his hand under the bed. That was just normal. I told people that one Purim morning, my father turns to me and says, 30 yom lifnei regel, 30 days before Pesach, the minhag is to learn Ilchot Pesach. Today is Purim, 30 days, let's learn. And we opened a Minchas Chinuch on Purim morning. And some guys came in and they said something about briskers being crazy, on Purim learning Minchas Chinuch. But that was my father. It was so simple to him to always be learning and to love learning. It was part of his life, it was part of who he was. And I say that because, in another context, which is after I got down from the hesped, I suddenly, of course, said to myself, I didn't say this, I didn't say this, I didn't say that. And one of my father's Talmidot, my father had Talmidim and Talmidot, one of my father's Talmidot came over and said to me, you know, you really didn't mention that your father was a pioneer in teaching women Torah. I said, whoa, you're the last person I want to get upset. So I have to really think to myself, why is that? So of course I said, first of all, I said, well, I'm sorry, I wasn't thinking right, I was very emotional about everything. But I said, if I want to try to find any rationale why I did not mention that, I explained because for my father, it wasn't a thing that he had to do to prove to anyone. He taught Torah to everyone, to women, to men, and he taught it the same way. He didn't give a shir differently if he gave a shir to women or to men or to children or to older people. He gave a shir the same way to everyone. He wasn't making any statements by teaching women Torah in the depth that he did. It was natural for him, it was normal for him. You want to learn? Bakasha, let's learn Torah. He taught women Gemara, he taught women Rishonim, he taught women the same way he would teach men. It wasn't any statement that he was coming out to say, oh, look, I'm going to teach women because of a certain reason. It was just simple to him. It was just normal for him to be able to teach Torah in that way. My father was very normal. We called him the normal rabbi. Rav Mital, at the time, right before he died, Rav Mital came to Gush and participated in my father's, my father left the yeshiva, they made a little party for him. And one of Rav Mital's last appearances in Alei Tzion, Rav Mital spoke about how he loved my father because he was so normal. And how Rav Mital said that he felt that there were so many rabbis, but so few of them out there were normal. He said, Rav Tabory, I have Rav Normali. Who Rav Normali? At the time, who Rav Normali? They spoke about how he really was people felt that he was you could talk to him, you could approach him, you could laugh with him, you could discuss with him sports, you could discuss with him what's happening in the world. My father had a sense of humor. He had a wonderful sense of humor. Two stories about a sense of humor came up in the Shiva that I think show more about a sense of humor about my father. One story was told to us by Shalaka. Shalaka is my father's helper from Sri Lanka, that really a great tzaddik who has been with my father for many years. Right before my father, at the point when he was still able to speak, to communicate, he had people coming over to the house to have a shir. So he once told Shalaka, the Sri Lankan, he said to him, Shalaka, before I'm about to have people come in for a shir, I'm putting a book here in my library. When I need the book, I'll ask you to bring it in for me. I said, fine. My father's giving a shir. In the middle of the shir, he says, ooh, there's an important Shagas Aryeh in this sugya. Shalaka, get me the Shagas Aryeh. All the students look and they say, Tabory, he knows where your Shagas Aryeh is? He goes in the study and brings it back. They all, of course, you're not a rabbi's farmer. I don't understand. Another story that came up in the Shiva, which shows also my father's connection not only to yeshiva boys, yeshiva girls, but also to balabatim. Elliot mentioned before about my father being a rabbi of a community and somehow connecting to balabatim. One of the women of Alon Shvut came to us in the Shiva. She said to us a wonderful story. We never heard it before. She said that years ago, one of her parents passed away. And she wanted to ask my father a simple question: when is she allowed to get a haircut? So the halacha is that we wait till one of your friends tells you off. So my father, she says, started discussing with her the halachot, the idea. He actually started discussing with her the idea that she wasn't covering her hair, so maybe there would be a difference of how she cares about her hair, doesn't care about her hair. He started learning the sugya with her about what would be the right answer for her. And then he said, but really, when someone tells you off, that's when you are supposed to get a haircut. And she said that a day later, she was jogging in Alon Shvut, and she made it to the Butka, where the Shomer is, at the Alon Shvut. And there were a bunch of yeshiva guys there waiting for a hitch, for a ride to leave Alon Shvut. And she was standing there as she was jogging, and suddenly my father drove by. And he opens the window, and he looks at her and he says, "What is wrong with you? You look terrible. It's time you get a haircut. Take care of yourself a little bit. Your hair looks just terrible. Do something about it," and drives on. All these Shiva boys were standing there. Couldn't understand what was happening. That was my Abba. A man who loved Torah, who taught Torah, but was very strongly here in this earth, part of us, part of the community, could relate to everyone. I want to end with one last thought, which I mentioned just a few weeks ago. The Gemara talks to us in two different places about remembering the Mikdash. We talk about a Zeicher LaMikdash, and we talk about a Zeicher LaChurban. The Gemara talks in Bava Batra about certain customs that we have to remember the Mikdash. Some people have a new custom of leaving part of their wall unfinished, putting ashes on the head of a chatan at a wedding. But the Gemara Masechet Sukkah also talks about certain customs that we do to remember the Mikdash, like shaking lulav all 7 days, like having Simchat Shoeva. Two Gemarot that talk about how to remember the Mikdash, but the Gemara brings two different psukim, two different sources to teach us of these customs. And Rabbi Soloveitchik, in one of his works on Masechet Sukkah, questions why the separation? Why do we have two psukim and two halachot? And the answer he gives is a very simple answer, but I think so true about how we commemorate the loss of the Mikdash. There are two ways to commemorate the Mikdash. One is we sit, we cry. We feel the pain that we have no Mikdash. We do certain acts to remember that we're missing something in our lives. On the other hand, sometimes we act in a way to remember the Mikdash, not in a sad way, but in a happy way. Right? When we shake the lulav, no one's crying. When we dance, Simchat Shoeva, we're not crying, we're celebrating that there was a Mikdash and that we used to carry the lulav there. There's actually an interesting discussion about, just mentioned that the discussion because my father would want me to discuss this right now. The Baal Amor and then the Pesachim discusses about why we don't say Ashechianu on Sfirat HaOmer. And the Baal Amor says it's because it's Zeicher LaMikdash. And the Rav Soloveitchik says that's not so clear because it's not a Zeicher LaMikdash that's sad. It's a happy Zeicher LaMikdash, right? According to what we just said now, it's not so clear what kind of Zeicher LaMikdash it is. However, we have a Zeicher LaChurban and we have a Zeicher LaMikdash. Two ways to commemorate the loss of the Mikdash. And when I learned this sugya not long ago, I realized that this is true also about how we commemorate people that we love. Sometimes we commemorate the people that we love by sitting shiva, by crying, by missing that person, and by acting in a certain way that really brings us tears and pain that we're missing the person that we love so much. But there's also a side of Zecher LaMikdash. There's also a side of celebrating that person's life in a way that we remember him fondly, with a smile on our faces, and we celebrate who they are. In this transition right now, in the past few weeks from Shiva, Shloshim, and into the year, I really feel that we are moving from a Zeicher LaChurban to a Zeicher LaMikdash. When we are learning and teaching my father's Torah, when people come to me and quote my father's Torah, and people say to me, I'm listening to him online, I was walking along Shvut and suddenly I hear someone running past me, totally randomly, and I hear my father on the tape as he's running by, jogging in Alon Shvut in the middle of the night. When I hear people reading the Torah of my father, learning the Torah of my father, quoting him, and the letters that are pouring in, and people mention how much he had an impact on their lives, and how much Torah he taught them, and how he continues to teach them Torah, I think we are moving from a Zecher LaChurban to a Zecher LaMikdash. We are remembering him with great love and affection, with sometimes not only tears in our eyes, but also smiles, as we remember my father in a very special way of what kind of person he was. Thank you all for coming.
Rav Aviad and Rabbi Sachs, thank you both for being so inspirational this evening. That's in part one of the reasons with the Kila of Alei Tzion and the Alei Tzion family wanted to have this evening's Hespedim was to bring you some nechama and comfort and consolation, but in actual fact what you've done is consoled us with your recollections of your father. It was a little bit challenging whenever you arrange an evening in Hespedim with three speakers, you always slightly run the risk that the three people are going to say the same thing. But in actual fact, what we've had this evening is three people focus, perhaps unintentionally, but on the three main facets of your father's personality, and which really summed him up and pays tribute to him in a most beautiful way. Elliot spoke about him and the contribution that he made to our Kehillah. Rabbi Sachs taught Torah in his memory, which was, of course, the centre stone of Rav Tabory's life. And you shared with us really what his personality was and the warm person that we all remember. And indeed, that Chazal talk about Sichat Chulin Shel Talmidei Chachamim. That was really what I remember most about your father. There wasn't really any Sichat Chulin, because whenever you had this Sichat Chulin conversation with him, it always morphed into a shir as well, and you learnt Torah from him. A shita would come up that he'd share with you, etc., etc. So it's really been very inspirational for all of us, and we hope that it's inspirational for you and for your family, and that you get nechama. We thank you for joining us this evening. We thank Rabbi Sachs for joining us this evening. We thank everybody for being here, paying tribute to Rav Tabory, Zichrono Livracha, and the best thing we know as a community that we can do in his memory is to perpetuate his legacy and to carry on learning the Torah that he valued so much. So we have an opportunity for Mariv now as well.
Yeah.